What's up, everybody? Brothers, sisters, psychonauts, and seekers of truth. It is Ananka, and welcome to my bazaar. Today, I have a trip report on methamphetamine and sleep deprivation. The title of this trip report is The City of Light, and was submitted to Earwid in 2003 by the user Blue Resonant Human. With all that being said, let our story begin. This experience occurred last summer during a sort of crisis period in which I had lost literally everything in my mundane life, an evidently necessary step in my continued progression towards greater enlightenment. This species' mystical and spiritual paths all appear to grant the would-be initiate such an opportunity should he or she prove earnest enough to continue the quest at all costs. Though said candidate must be suitably warned that the loss of quite literally everything, from family to home, to possessions to health, and even to sanity, can be harrowing and at times an even terrifying experience, perhaps especially during the already trying times of middle age. In any event, it was during these deeply unsettling times that we began our pursuit in earnest, no longer tethered by so many mundane concerns and responsibilities. It was during this period that we, for a brief season, hooked up with Susie Cream Cheese, of Frank Zappa, Mothers of Invention fame, delighted that she took her tantric path as seriously as we, and we hoping in some naively optimistic way that love would somehow prevail, abandon ourselves to the ensuing current, only to discover subsequently that this too, sadly, was an illusory path of little worth and redeeming value. So, resolved to continue our explorations alone for a time, we embarked on a voyage of consciousness, wherein all the stops were pulled out, and we abandoned ourselves utterly and completely to the explorations which presented themselves via the modality of methamphetamine-induced psychic overdrive, allowing, as we stated in an earlier missive, the very substance itself to dictate its administration and psychological set and setting. For the space of approximately 4 months, we would regularly embark on lengthy ordeals of 2 to 3 weeks of intense substance administration and abstinence from both food and sleep. Our mundane health and physical appearance suffering significantly. During the height of our explorations, our physical container had deteriorated to the point of being just under 100 pounds. At 5'10", we typically maintain a weight of approximately 170 pounds. Eating and sleeping becoming all but vestigial remnants of a cloudy, dreamlike existence of ostensible normalcy. During one such episode, we had accidentally accelerated the process of initiation such that we found ourselves at a most bizarre level of awareness. On top of the earlier documented auditory aspects of psychic overdrive, i.e., hearing the thoughts of others, we experienced at approximately 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks a new plateau wherein we could see more clearly with our eyes closed. In fact, the level of visual perception was such that we could effortlessly see through walls in a full 360-degree panoramic fashion, not unlike the reports we have read of percipients experiencing an out-of-body or near-death experience, and the resultant remarkable visual acuity which accompanies this particular headspace. And it could be reasonably well argued that we were in fact near death, for we had neglected the health and well-being of our physical container so thoroughly as to at least subconsciously express a cry for release of the very universe itself. This psychological doldrums finally culminating in an episode in which we found ourselves early one morning shouting the most dire of threats and profanities at local law enforcement personnel, in an apparent attempt to coerce them into assisting us in our compelling desire to be free from the binding constraints composed by the captivity of this mortal coil. It was at this approximate leg of our magical journey that the universe evidently saw fit to enlighten us as to what we have subsequently learned, the larger reality. Our understanding and awareness substantially enriched by this illumination. We had grown all too wary of life on this dimensional level, and the captivity so perniciously imposed by these temporal bags of skin and this apparent penal colony of a planet. For we were unmistakably strangers in a strange land, and more often than not found ourselves utterly ashamed to be, in any way, affiliated with either this backwards prison planet, so rife with selfishness and greed, or its primitive, myopically self-serving species, the apes which speak. Fully entrenched in psychic overdrive one evening, our thoughts were guided down a path of apparent historical reflection. Quite unexpectedly, we found ourselves undergoing a journey of remembrance, wherein our entire life was reviewed, from the vantage point not of an abandoned child at the mercy of a random, chaotic tide of isolated, solitary despair, but instead, starting from very early childhood, we were shown each and every seemingly unresolved act of cruelty or unfairness ever imposed upon us, and more importantly, the ineffable wisdom and kindness which orchestrated the events, all with an eye towards refining our character and personality. At once, all of the apparent cruelty and unfairness washed away, leaving in its stead an awareness that all of the seemingly unrelated events were in fact orchestrated for our benefit, and left us, in fact, better people for it. The illuminations continued on in this fashion for an unknown period of time, as when on that particular dimensional level, time waxes all but irrelevant. But they continued on in a logical progression until completion, which was right up to the very present, all accompanied by the greatest relief and understanding, which expressed itself in deep cathartic sobs of cleansing emotion. And it was at this point we were made aware that we are in fact not alone in our struggles. There is a veritable army. I use the words with reticence, for it unfortunately carries with it culturally imposed notions of war, death, torment, etc. Of us who are undergoing similar preparation or training, earmarked by the loss of all things we hold dear, and without which we think we shall surely fail, but in reality bind us to this baser level of mundane existence, crippling our inexorable metamorphosis into something of infinitely greater value and beauty. In that, there are many of us currently undergoing these ostensibly devastating preparatory processes. I became aware that the time is nearing for us to be made aware of our similarly struggling fellow, men and women, and was shown that various calls for awakening would be issued in the relatively near future. These calls would take the form of symbolically encrypted snippets of communication, mystically and cryptically embedded in music, art, the written word, and various dramatic presentations. These deeply symbolic messages will be embedded by those awakening to others, of us who have also embarked upon awakening paths, all with the uber goal of letting us know that, number one, we are not alone in all of this, and have all been enrolled in a form of metaphysical boot camp. And number two, there is, in fact, an overarching goal to the seemingly unrelated processes, the goal being the construction of a city of light. In terms to this city, we were provided the explication during a period of abnormal normalcy, as noted in the earlier missive, The Ritual of the Rising Sun, wherein the substance of the meme took on a flavor termed analytical overlay by certain psi types, of an unimaginably complex three-dimensional printed circuit board construction. Perhaps this was merely an artifact of the already modern scientific taint of the artificial methamphetamine-induced headspace. But in any case, the perceptual matrix proved relatively capable of adequately articulating the core substance of the thought stream. The visions continued logically to the point where we observed a sort of assembling of people in spiritual, metaphysical form to form an enormous three-dimensional cube, each being, each essence inhabiting a rectangular, almost coffin-like space in the overall cube. Many, many hundreds of these beings linked together, all slid into their respective drawer-like enclosures, and together formed this enormous cube of light. And we could somehow understand some of the metaphysical energy which resulted from the circuit-like wiring together of all the participants. For each and every one was capable of doing something entirely unique, better than anyone else, and infinitely valuable to the overall purpose of the city itself. And here as well came not so much a warning as a deeper understanding of the necessity of bearing with the various, ostensibly cruel preparatory processes designed to ready the participant for his or her inclusion into the circuitry of the city. I recalled reading many years back that there was a certain engineering practice at play during the construction of the Panama Canal, wherein some poor fellow was tasked with the responsibility of estimating how many workers would perish during the construction of the canal. In like fashion, there will be a certain number of proposed or called members who comprise this city of light, for the city itself is formed solely and entirely by the very souls of the members themselves, who will become too discouraged over the apparent ravages of the preparatory processes and prematurely take their own lives, as we ourselves had attempted on occasion. Those who prematurely give up and orchestrate their own premature demise leave in the city empty slots where they were supposed to plug in. As I was shown the exterior of the cube, or city, there were a number of these empty slots, and with each one I was shown, there was an accompanying, overwhelming sorrow, somehow affixed to that particular emptiness, such that it had the overall feel of a wound, a deep scar in the city, which invoked a deeply sorrowful weeping in me at the sight of each and every one. And in the uber mind of the ineffable being in charge of design and construction of the city, it appeared as though there was a sort of threshold of error, if you will, in which the city would become and remain functional if and only that apparent threshold was not exceeded. If no more than a certain percentage of structural members did not leave such non-functional scars by taking their own lives prematurely. Now I will grant the reader here that the perceptual model employed was an admittedly theory-embedded and culture-bound one, but from within this context, it became crystal clear why so many of this species' religious and spiritual traditions are so opposed to suicide. For on a large enough scale, this dysfunction carries with it the potential to abort the overall City of Light program. In any event, when the city was completely assembled, it began to rise from the surface of the planet and began to glow from within. For whatever reason, the meme of Atlantis rising overshadowed the event, as did the Judeo-Christian notion of the millennial New Jerusalem. But though desirous of seeing more, this is where the visions ended, evidently sufficient to re-empower myself, and potentially others reading this, with the desire to carry on and avoid those despondent, suicidal tendencies which had so plagued us earlier in our journeys. It is my sincere hope that this brief missive will prove of some value to those encountering it. Wishing you all the best. Fratre Cobaltus. February 16th, 2003, Gregorian. Alright, everyone. That is the end of our story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Share with us your meth experiences down in the comments below. Check out the other videos and playlists on my channel, and I will see you in the next one, fam. Deuces.